Before I do start this video, make sure to use my TCG player affiliate down below if you're looking for any of these singles that I talk about today. Also, this channel is sponsored by Arcane Fortress. If you're looking for the best deck boxes around, make sure to use my link down below in the description to check them out. One other way you can support the channel is by becoming a patron. There are some great benefits of being a patron to the channel, such as giveaways, deck advice, and more when you do join. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on PubStomp MTG, and in today's topic I will be focusing on companions for 2024. A long time ago I made a 2022 list talking about some commanders they're viable with, and I wanted to go over them again because of course the past 2 years we got an exponential amount of commanders that we did get. And the reason why I do like talking about companions is the fact that they do lead to very different deck building instructions. For example, they need to have a certain requirement in order to have them as your companion. For example, Keruga the Macrosage, it has that cost of your starting deck contains only cards with converted mana cost 3 or greater and land cards. So say goodbye to those soul rings and all those low CMC mana rocks or cards in general. And honestly, it's not the greatest strategy in the world, but it does lead to fun and interesting deck building. But obviously that is just one example. I did want to dive into each companion for commander and focus on them specifically. I know they're definitely hated in a lot of different formats, especially with Lurrus being banned in multiple, and I want to say Yorion's banned in a couple. I'm not 100% sure, but it definitely was a mistake. But I feel like in commander it does lead to more interesting and I want to say janky deck building. Of course, 2 are banned specifically in Commander for their various reasons. Yorion's technically not banned though, it just can't be used as a companion. You can use it in the 99 if you did want to, because you can't have more than 100 cards in your starting deck. So Yorion, you can't be the companion. Same can be said for Lutri the Spell Chaser. This was banned even before it was even released yet, because of course Commander is a singleton format. It focuses on each non-land card. Starting deck has a different name, so of course with Lutri it just auto-included any Izzet deck. So I do understand the banning of that. I wish it was banned as a companion, not banned in Commander in general. I would love to have it in the 99 or as a commander itself, because of course it's very cute and adorable. But luckily with Bloomborough we are getting more otter support. So unfortunately Lutri and Yorion, I can't talk about you both. I wish I could, but those 2 are excluded from this discussion topic because I'm focusing on companions that could actually be companions. But I will say a lot of these cards can be great in the 99. Some can lead to some great combos. So now with that said, let's dive into the 8 companions that we can use in Commander. So let's start off the list with Zirda the Dawnwaker. So this is a Boros companion. Let's first read what he does. So for 1 and Boros hybrid colors, the companion cost is each permanent card in your starting deck has an activated ability. Also he does read abilities you activate that aren't mana abilities cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana cost to less than 1 mana. Also he does have an activated ability itself. You pay 1 and tap him, target creature can't block this turn. So activated abilities, whether you're tapping a creature or paying into a mana cost, this can be a great companion to reduce the mana cost of your activated ability of certain creatures. For example, this can be a great companion to Kenrith the Returned King, reducing all those activated abilities by 2, because remember they do have those colored pips. It's not reducing it by less than 1. So basically for the first 3 abilities, obviously the red one is only paying 1 red mana, but the green and the white ability can be reduced by 2, so you could just pay a green and then pay in a white to activate those 2 abilities. To draw a card, it will basically be costing 2 mana instead of 4 mana, and returning a creature card from the graveyard onto the battlefield will be 3 mana instead of 5 mana. So of course that could be fun and maybe a different build for Kenrith, because of course Kenrith does see more CDH play than casual play. But if you were wanting to make a jankier version of Kenrith, you could add Zirda as the companion to basically restrict it a little bit, and so that your opponents are a little bit at ease compared to having a regular Kenrith. However, I feel like the perfect commander that could companion with Zirda would be Tazri Stalwart Survivor. This came out of the March of the Machine Aftermath set, and this focuses on activated abilities and does have an activated ability herself, so this is basically Zirda's dream. That last ability focuses on milling 5 cards, put creature cards with activated abilities that aren't mana abilities from among the milled cards into your hand, so that's going to be very easy to do because we're only running activated ability creature cards. Because I absolutely love my dinosaurs, I feel like Zirda could be a great companion to Zacama Primal Calamity because it does have 3 activated abilities. Of course, you can untap all lands you control when it enters the battlefield and if it was cast, and it just has a great array of abilities of either dealing damage to creatures, creatures, gaining life, or even destroying artifacts or enchantments, so you're really clearing the board, especially reducing those mana costs to just those red or green or white pips. So Zirda is absolutely great in those activated ability decks. If you really want to dive into it to the fullest extent, you can have Zirda as the companion. However, I do have 8 companions to talk about, so I don't want to make this a super long video, so let's dive into the second companion that I do want to focus on, and that companion is Umori the Collector. So let's first read what it does before diving into it. So for 2 and 2 Golgari color combinations, the companion cost is each non-land card in your starting deck shares a card type. So basically this is very limiting because it'll only focus on enchantments, artifacts, or creatures, because you can't have an instant or sorcery commander specifically. He also does read when he enters the battlefield, you choose a card type. Spells that you cast of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. So it's a pretty cool companion. Obviously you have to focus on a very specific card type. Again, you can't use instant or sorceries or even battles specifically. So the most popular commander that people do take advantage of this card with is Henzi Toolbox Tor, and for good reason too, because this is a pretty powerful commander, especially with Umori as the companion. You can focus on an all creature deck, blitzing them out little by little with Henzi Toolbox Tor and reducing the cost even more with Umori the Collector. I personally haven't brewed around this commander specifically, but if you do want to look for a good video, Deck Tech for Decks has a great video talking about Umori with Henzi. Of course, on the creature side of things, it's very easy to make an Umori deck, but I would say what's more challenging is making an artifact deck. I don't think there's really a commander, maybe besides a 5-color artifact commander, that could really take advantage of Umori, but I will say enchantment commanders can also take advantage of it specifically. So of course, with Umori being the companion of your enchantment deck, you will have to have all enchantments in your deck, including your commander. So some commanders from the top of my mind are Ghost Shintai of Life's Origin, because you're going to be running a shrine deck, and itself is a shrine too. I'm pretty sure I'm going to butcher this name, but Anithika, Hand of Erebos, and Farika, God of Affliction can all be great enchantment commanders specifically for Umori. I would say personally your best bet would be Ghost Shintai, because you are in the 5-color combination and running all the shrines. You could reduce the mana cost of all your shrines with Umori out on the battlefield. So whether you're choosing enchantment, artifact, or even creature types with Umori, you will have to go all in that specific creature type, whether it's one of those 3 options. But personally, if I were you, I would take a look at Henzi, because that's definitely going to be the best option for your Umori decks. But now let's move on to the next companion on the list, and that's Keruga the Macrosage. This is going to be an expensive commander, not so much money wise, but more for all your permanents and spells will be mana cost 3 or greater based off the companion cost. But he does have a really good upside when he does enter the battlefield. You draw cards for each other permanent you control with converted mana cost 3 or greater. I will say, out of all the companions that are out there and legal, this has probably given me the most grief, because I absolutely love this card. It is a dinosaur hippo. You know me with my dinosaurs, I absolutely love them. So seeing a dinosaur hippo, I just want to jam it as a companion as much as I can. Unfortunately, the downside is you can't run things CMC 2 or less. And if you think that's very minuscule, it's not. It's really hard to do that, especially not running any mana rocks like Soul Ring, or even some RAM packages that are 2 CMC or less. I wish Keruga read similar to Lurrus in the fact that permanent spells will be 3 CMC or higher in the deck instead of spells in general and lands. The fact that it is any spell with 3 CMC or greater really just does suck. But I will say there is ways that you could cheat around Keruga the Macrosage's companion requirement cost by using adventure spells, because their mana cost does read on the top right. So for example, Bone Crusher Giant is 3 CMC, but it does have the adventure cost of paying 2 mana to basically do 2 damage to any target. So if you were to go into that adventure theme with Keruga, Balluna Grand Squall could actually be a very fun commander with that. You can reduce the mana cost of your adventure spells by 1 less with that ability that Balluna does have. She also does have a instant adventure cost too, but really you're running it for that first ability so that you can reduce all your adventure cards. Other fun options that I do want to highlight is Blue Loyal Raptor and Owen Grady Raptor Trainer. You can essentially have 3 commanders in the commander zone. I mean, obviously you do have Keruga in the companion zone, but you're really having 3 cards in your starting hand when you think about it in that way. Because Keruga itself is a dinosaur, I did want to point that out specifically. It'll work perfectly with Blue Loyal Raptor's ability of giving it extra abilities on top of that. Another interesting card that you could consider as a commander for Keruga is Gandalf Westward Voyager. This does focus on you casting spells with mana value 5 or greater, which is perfect because it's technically 2 more than what Keruga requires. But I do feel like one of the better commanders you could take advantage of is Yarok the Desecrated because of that ETB doubling effect. Because Keruga does have an ETB itself, you'll draw twice as many cards you would get with that ETB with Keruga, depending on how much cards you do have 3 CMC or more on the battlefield. But that'll be very easy to do, especially with Yarok. You're going to get so much cards into your hand so that you can get more ETBs when you do cast them. Again, I absolutely love this companion, even though it does give me so much grief building around it for that 3 CMC or higher. But again, it can be another very fun option in your specific decks. So now that we talked about high CMC cards, let's focus on low CMC cards with Lurrus of the Dream Den. This is by far one of the more playable ones you can play in your commander deck and can be very powerful as a recurable piece. Its companion cost, each permanent card in your starting deck has converted mana cost 2 or less, but you can have spells that are 2 CMC or more because it focuses on permanents specifically, and it does have lifelink. During each of your turns, you may cast 1 permanent spell with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard. So I believe I mentioned this already, but it's banned in multiple formats and for good measure because this is extremely powerful. Having that ability for 2 CMC or less in your deck is not really a huge requirement, mainly because those will have to be permanent spells, but everything else is free game. Instant and sorcery spells could be any kind of number of CMC as you want, but I will say there's a lot of commanders that could take advantage of this one specifically. If you're going the 5 color option, Jedson, Carthalion, Druid Exile is a great option. Also Ezio, the new Assassin's Creed commander, could be another great option too, because you can run those 5 color combinations. But honestly, that's the big problem I do have with those specific commanders and Lurrus. Are you really running them because they have synergy with each other, or that you just could? But I feel like some commanders that could really take advantage of Lurrus's ability to recur things from the graveyard to the battlefield are Lasso Core, Sadistic Pilgrim, because the Lasso Core will focus on that aristocrat strategy. And with Lurrus on the battlefield, you can basically recover the card that you did sacrifice so that you can take advantage of a Lasso Core's ability some more. So we all know that Lurrus is busted, and I know a lot more people usually look to a lot of low CMC commanders if they could fit in with Lurrus specifically. So currently right now we are halfway through the companions that you can take advantage of in Commander. So now let's turn our focus to another companion with Kaheera the Orphanguard. So Kaheera is pretty niche with her ability of the companion cost. Each creature in your starting deck is a cat, elemental, nightmare, dinosaur, or a beast. So if you are in the Selesnya color combinations and you are playing one of those creature types as your main focus, this is absolutely going to be a slam dunk, no question about it. But it does have a great Anthem ability for those creature types, giving them +1/+1 and Vigilance, and itself does have Vigilance too as a 3/2 body. So I'll tell you what, I am running this in 2 different decks right now, one with a dinosaur deck and one with a cat deck. Currently with my dinosaur deck, I am running it with Pantlaza Sun Favored, and honestly it works very well with that Discover ability, because when Kaheera is on the battlefield, it'll give all your dinosaurs +1/+1 and Vigilance. So if you do have Pantlaza on the battlefield or another dinosaur that enters the battlefield, you could discover more. Instead of discovering 5 with a creature, you could discover 6, for example, with Kaheera. And of course, because I am a cat dad, Arabo War of the World is another deck that I am running. And technically it is my wife's deck, but I like playing it too because Arabo, at least the Secret Lair version, does look like my cat. Obviously doesn't have as crazy hair as Arabo, but you kind of get the point with it. So there are plenty of other decks that really can take advantage of Kaheera and giving all your creatures +1/+1 and Vigilance. Other commanders that I can think of are Gishath Sun's Avatar, Renan Siri Inseparable, Sovereign Okonek Au, and Jetmir Nexus of Revels. Of course, again, there's plenty of other commanders that you can take advantage of with those specific creature types, but those are the most notable ones. And I will say something really cool about Kaheera is the fact that obviously if you are in those creature types, this is a slam dunk, but if you're not, then you're not really going to be using it. So in a way, it's easier to be a companion, but harder too, depending on what kind of scenario you are in. So following Kaheera, I do have Jegantha the Wellspring that I do want to discuss with you. This one is a Gruul companion, but technically it is a 5 color companion because of that Wooburg cost that it does tap for. And the rules for the companion cost will be no card in your starting deck has more than one of the same mana symbols and its mana cost. So this one is an interesting one. It sees a lot of play in a lot of 5 color decks, obviously because it only can go in 5 color decks. Recently on my channel, I did make a deck tech around Niv Mizzet Guild Pack that focuses specifically on those guild colors, because usually they will have about 2 different color combinations on them. But to be quite honest, this is a pretty big downside. Only being able to go into 5 color decks is really just saddening because it's such cool art, and I'm not a big fan of playing 5 color decks. Usually the less colors I'm all about. Usually 2 to 3 colors is my sweet spot. But if I were to think of a couple commander options, I do like Jared Carthalion because it does focus on having more multicolored spells, and the more colors you do have on the battlefield, the more you can just buff up your creatures. I also do think another great companion would be Omnath Locust of All. This is absolutely brilliant with Jegantha because if anything else, you tap Jegantha, then later on, if you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes black instead. But to be honest, there are a lot of 5-color commanders that have activated abilities that you can take advantage of. For example, Gyruda Archmage Eternal is a fantastic one, focusing on paying Wooburg mana cost rather than a mana cost of spells that you do cast. So if you do have a big Eldrazi deck, you can pay 5 Wooburg mana that you do tap with Jegantha with Gyruda's ability. Instead of paying like 10 mana into an Eldrazi, you could just pay 5. But I will say the big downside on Jegantha, because everything that I'm talking about sounds great on paper, but the fact that you can't play any spells that have like 2 of the same color in their color combination, for example, like a Terror of the Peaks you can't play because it does have 2 red pips. But for me personally, I'm not a big fan of Jegantha, again, because it is a 5-color one. You can't really play it in any other deck besides 5 colors. If anything, that's more of the restriction than its actual companion cost. Alright, so rant over. Let's focus on the next companion, and I'll tell you what, this is very odd, if you know what I mean, and that's Obosh the Prepiercer. So this one is another companion that I have been trying to make work for a while, especially with different commanders. I feel like sometimes Wizards knows what they're doing. If they have a really cool damage commander, it's obviously going to be an even converted mana cost instead of odd converted mana cost. For example, when I was making a Zeator the Incinerator deck, everything was going for it, focusing on that damage effect, basically flinging stuff over, and I thought to myself, this would be a really good card with Obosh. But then I quickly remembered that Obosh focuses on odd converted mana cost cards, and Zeator the Incinerator is a even converted mana cost card, and so I couldn't make that happen, unfortunately. But I will say there's actually a surprising amount of commanders that could really take advantage of Obosh's ability of doubling damage. For example, Torwaki the Younger is a perfect one. He does have lifelink, so whenever he deals damage, he will gain life. Especially whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it will deal 2 damage to any target, or should I say 4 damage to any target with Obosh. If you're going more for that Punisher theme, Keruga the Merciless can be pretty brutal. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, it will deal damage equal to that spell's mana value to any target. So of course, if you do have Obosh on the battlefield, you'll just double that damage. But I personally feel one of the cooler options that you can take advantage of is Vial Smasher of the Fierce and Jessica Thrice Reborn, mainly because they both amplify damage in a certain way. Jessica Thrice Reborn, you can pay into that 0 ability to triple the damage of one creature, and with Vial Smasher of the Fierce, you could really take advantage of casting spells to deal damage, and of course you will double all those with Obosh. Another commander to helm Obosh as its companion would be Abaddon the Despoiler. This is a really insane one because during your turn, spells you cast from your hand with mana value X or less have Cascade, where X is the total mana value of life your opponents have lost this turn. So of course, if you make your opponents lose a lot of life with Obosh on the battlefield, you could basically cast anything from your hand and give a Cascade most likely. But now we are moving to our last companion. I saved the best for last because this is probably my favorite companion out of the bunch, and that's Gyruda Doom of Depths. I will say out of all the companions, I probably have the most history with this one, mainly because I ran a lot of standard events with Gyruda as my companion with 4 other copies, and basically I was going for a clone Gyruda deck, and honestly it was one of my favorite standard decks when I was playing at the time. So I knew immediately when I transitioned to EDH, I needed to find a deck that would fit Gyruda perfectly, and for the longest time, there was no deck that I felt personally attached to. I will say I did try out a lot of different commanders, but none of them really fit my playstyle with Gyruda. I did try Muldrotha the Gravetide, for example. It is a fun deck, no doubt about it, having Gyruda with Muldrotha, but again, for me, it wasn't personally there. But I will say, Muldrotha is probably one of the better commanders that you can be playing with Gyruda Doom of Depths, mainly because you are milling cards with Gyruda, and then you can take advantage of those cards that were milled with Muldrotha's ability as long as they're permanents. Another example I could think of that take advantage of the graveyard is Cedrus the Traitor King, but again, like Muldrotha, it didn't really jive with me. Again, another great commander to take advantage of that milling ability with Gyruda, but it really wasn't for me. So basically years went by without without me making a Gyruda deck, then all of a sudden it hit me and I had the epiphany. Be'lakor the Dark Master is the perfect commander with Gyruda Doom Adepts. So I have actually been personally making this deck. I have about 80% of it built in paper right now, and I can't tell you enough how much they complement each other. I will plan to make a deck tech around Be'lakor the Dark Master and Gyruda Doom Adepts later on in this week or next week, or maybe in a couple weeks. We'll find out when it happens. I know spoilers are coming out for Outlaws of Thunder Junction soon, and I will be covering those. But going back to Be'lakor the Dark Master and also Gyruda Doom Adepts, and I completely forgot that Gyruda was a demon and that it could take advantage of Be'lakor's ability when it enters the battlefield. You will deal damage equal to Gyruda's power to any target. And of course, in the deck that I'm making a clone deck where if Gyruda mills a card and if it's a clone, I could just repeat the process by putting another Gyruda on the battlefield. Basically the strategy I was making in Standard, and I will say Terror of the Peaks was also in that deck too, so honestly this does have some sentimental value from me playing Standard all the way back then, basically almost doing the same strategy in Commander. So I am extremely excited to talk about Be'lakor the Dark Master with Gyruda Doom Adepts, and I will be focusing on it in a later video. However, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on Companions in Commander. Of course, this is a 2024 update. With this update video, I did want to discuss with you some old commanders that I may have discussed in a previous video on Companions, and some new ones as well. But let me know down below in the comments which is your favorite companion and what kind of commander do you like to pair with it. I would love to hear your thoughts. Also, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stopping by.